Well, my name is Robin Scully. I'm the art program director for Perspective Gallery. I want to welcome everybody here to the event, to Amy's talk. I feel very fortunate to have this very talented artist with us, Amy Reeder, who's come up from Asheville with her family, her dog Hazel, and her husband Adam, right?
Yeah.
And sharing this beautiful work with us. You know, it's been a tonic for us to have this work in the gallery this very cold and snowy winter. It was actually a real winter. And we've been playing kind of a little forest sounds loop, so people would come in and go, oh, yeah, there's still things out there that we want to see again. I think what's so impressive about Amy's work, not only is it beautiful, but it also reminds us how important the little things in the world are. You know, we walk in the forest and we step on the ground and we smash these things, right? But when they're up on the wall, we look at them and they suddenly take on this monumental importance. And so hopefully the small things that are in the world will become more obvious to you, more important to you. Amy is, as I said, from Asheville. She lost a lot of her work during Hurricane Helene. I won't go into a lot of the background. I know she went to school at University of Richmond. Mm-hmm. And she also did an internship in Peru. Was it an internship or
residency?
Residency in Peru. So has some really interesting art experiences. So I'd like to have Amy take a few minutes now to talk to you and tell you more about her work. And so without further ado.
Thank you, Robin, and hello, everyone. My name is Amy Reeder, and as Robin said, I'm from Asheville, North Carolina. My love of textiles began when I was 6 years old. I learned how to sew on a sewing machine by watching the same VHS tape over and over and over again. I quickly expanded to learning how to knit and crochet with the support of both of my grandmothers. I made silly little hats that were misshapen, trapezoidal scarves, and most of all, I enjoyed making tiny little sweaters for my stuffed animals, either hand sew, and I made a denim jacket for one that was particularly great. During those formative years, I also fell in love with painting, drawing, and any other art form I could access. Art has always been central to my life, and I could not imagine pursuing any other path. During my college years, my fiber work and my artwork were kept separate. I would sew in my spare time as a respite from my busy schedule as an art student. And then my senior year, I was working on my capstone project, and the paintings I had been painting were not coming together. I was frustrated, and I was hitting wall after wall after wall. In some sort of delirious 2 a.m. studio fog, I decided to start to explore fiber and treat it as I'd been treating paint. And that moment where my love of art and my love of textiles combined, there was no more going back. I could not imagine pursuing any other combination of materials from going forward. I ended up doing my entire senior project on that, and this was the end of my senior year, so this was very much the last minute. But it was the pivot that worked for me. During this season of my life in college, when I started exploring fibers, my art was my lifeline. My dad had died suddenly, and I was struggling to make it through my last year of school. When I started sewing, I felt like I was sewing myself back together. It gave me a tangible place to put my grief. Each stitch marked a moment in time, another moment I'd survived. The rings of felt built around and around and around, recording another hour, another day, another week that I'd survived. This slow, meditative process kept me grounded in a world that I didn't think I could survive, a world without my dad. Each stitch affirmed my new mantra: I'm still here, I'm still here, I'm still here. Nearly 12 years later, I'm still here. I didn't know it then, but I was creating work using a technique that I would eventually learn was called standing wool, with its own long history. That history is a story for another day. There are 3 pieces in this gallery: dusk, ocean sunset, and garden, that are in this standing wool technique. As I continued my career as an artist, I watched my art shift from being rooted in processing my own grief to becoming an expression of my joy. As I watched myself heal and change, I watched my art change with me. This change was most notable in 2021, when I was diagnosed with autism. For as long as I can remember, I felt like the world I'm experiencing is not the same as my peers. It is more intense, the colors are brighter, the sounds are louder, the smells are stronger, and every bit of it is overwhelming. When I was diagnosed, I learned that my world actually is more intense, not because I'm broken, as I previously thought, but because my brain is wired differently. The autistic brain processes sounds, smells, sights, emotions, and nearly every other human experience more intensely than the neurotypical brain. It was not news to me that I experienced emotions more intensely than the people around me. With this new information, I began to focus on my experience of joy. Joy for me is like stepping into a small world that only I can experience, and that I can't really articulate. The first time I ever put on noise-canceling headphones, I wept. I didn't know that the world could be that quiet or that safe. My headphones created a little bubble around me where I was safe to think, explore, and interact with my world. It was as if I was in the middle of Times Square, and I've been and I hated it, and then was instantly transported into a quiet and serene forest. I was able to create my own little world where I was safe and I was happy. Nothing else exists in those tiny worlds of joy. I began to channel this feeling into my work. My joy was easy to access and existed in the forefront of my life. I was exploring the world around me with a new enthusiasm, spurred on by my autism diagnosis, and instead of trying to change how I navigated the world, I embraced it. During this exploration, I also presented my first solo show. It was titled Beneath the Surface, and I have described this body of work as a love letter to my autistic brain. It was inspired by small moments of joy that I'd experienced when I chose to look closer, when I looked beneath the surface of the tide pools, at the mossy log in the forest, or any other little pocket of lichen on a sidewalk that in the streets where you might miss. All of those moments represented a tiny world of joy. That collection was vibrant and full of dense color, sequins, beads, soft round edges, circular forms, and many, many rainbow pieces. That body of work was an outpouring of self-discovery and affirmation. I've always felt as though I can explain my art better, or my experience better, through my art than through my words. And that collection was a celebration of coming home to my autistic brain. On September 27th, 2024, the majority of that work was destroyed by Hurricane Helene when it hit western North Carolina. Most of my work was never recovered, and the few pieces that were recovered were far too damaged to attempt to restore. There are 4 pieces in this show that survived from that collection: Dusk and Ocean Sunset, and the ocean floor diptych in the back. They were at my house instead of at local galleries, which is why they survived. After such a devastating loss, it felt impossible to conceive of making work again. I'd so recently discovered that anchoring my art to my experience of joy was essential to building not only a sustainable practice, but creating art that I actually wanted to share with the world. I could not imagine making anything after Hurricane Helene. Eventually, I convinced myself that I could make tiny work, no bigger than 12 inches. These small pieces were safe, because if they were destroyed again, oh well, they're tiny. It was okay. They were so small, I wouldn't be sad. Each small piece that I made in the year following Hurricane Helene was numbered by how many days had passed since the flood. The first one I created was 97 days post-flood. During this season of only making tiny work, I knew I'd eventually make big work again. The only reason I was really confident in that fact was because I had deadlines to meet, and they required me to make larger work again. I wasn't sure how I'd get back to a place of living in my own tiny world of joy in the midst of so much pain and grief, not only for myself, but for my community. Those tiny pieces became little life rafts, proof that on day 117 post-flood, I found this little moment of joy, just like I did on day 97 and day 98 and day 99. It was possible. Each small piece was a tiny reclamation of joy. Now, a year and a bit later, my work has shifted away from the Beneath the Surface collection and its rainbow colors and shiny sequins. The work in this collection is more muted. It's grounded in browns and more earthy tones than my work ever has been before. The colors are softer, but the edges are sharper. There are no sequins or beads for sparkle. This work is full of windows into tiny worlds of joy that I fought for. That choice to pursue joy in the midst of grief. Instead of a celebration, it is a declaration that joy still exists and I will find it. This show includes techniques that I began exploring at the very beginning of my time with Fiberheart. Techniques I used while rooted in grief and driven from a need to record every moment. It includes the few survivors from my previous collection that are a love letter to my autistic brain. And now it includes many, many pieces that were created in a season when joy was not easy to find, but I chose to find it anyway. I chose to look for the moments where I felt safe and at ease during a time when nothing felt safe and nothing felt easy. I chose to seek out and create my own tiny worlds of joy, and I am so grateful to be able to share them with you. And questions, I am happy to take questions. Or we can wander. Yes?
Do you travel much to see lichens and other fungi that are kind of foreign to you?
So we have a lot of funky stuff in the Blue Ridge Mountains. My sister-in-law is a professional at taking really good photos on her hikes because she goes kind of everywhere. I have not been able to travel as much as I would like, but I also find that I was actually describing it to someone earlier, where if you've seen really beautiful macro photography that makes that tiny little thing look as if it's larger than life, that's a lot of how I experience those little moments. So I don't feel as though I need to go too far, in part because they feel so big to me. But I also would love to travel and see everything, but it is not central to my process right now.
I asked that because I remember seeing rocks in South Africa that the lichens were just
Yes.
practically neon.
Yes. Yeah. I would love to go and see everything, but I have not yet. Yes.
Kind of related, so are all of the fungi and plants and things and lichens, are they all like based on real like fungi?
It's a combination. So for me, when I find something that really resonates with me, I do like to document it on my phone. And I tend to go through a process where I have found the inspiration point and I have sketched and I have written and then I put the original picture away and I move off of memory, because something that's so important for me in my process is not capturing the memory with 100% visual fidelity, but for the experiential feeling, where I'm talking about making things that are so large and make you feel small, and you wouldn't have that experience unless you were a tiny little fairy on a log, which is my goal in life. And you can't get that feeling just from an iPhone photo, which only does so much. So I work off of an amalgamation of photos, an amalgamation of references, and so I can look at things and tell you, oh, I pulled from this photo, this photo, this photo, and this photo, from this place, or from this reference on the internet, or from this guidebook of mushrooms and fungi and lichen in North America, or, and put them all together. So it's not directly one-to-one to anything in specific, but a combination or reflection of my own experiences with that source material. Yes?
When I heard the story of how this exhibit is connected to Helene, I guess because I spend so much time in the woods, it made sense, because you don't get chicken of the woods until you've had a storm.
Yeah.
I assume there's connection there.
Though less directly, it's more that the bright color was that little pop, that was that anchor for me. And so the inspiration sources that are derived from those vibrant orange amidst the muddy are my connection for that. That, I was saying, that little vibe craft, that little moment of, okay, there's something, it's not all, pretty much felt all bad, but look, I can find one tiny good thing. Yes.
Something I noticed as I was looking is there's a lot of incorporation of purple, which I feel like isn't one of the colors that jumps out to you when you're thinking of forest ground. But it also connects back to your ocean work, so I was wondering if that's where the color comes from or somewhere else.
I would say more from my ocean work. Yeah, there's definitely a direct line. A lot of the work that is back there is more of my ocean work inspired. We lived in Portland, Oregon, so we had really great access to the coast and a lot of really good tide pools for a while. And so that was a lot of my work. My Beneath the Surface collection was heavily informed by all the tide pools I got to go and explore. And purple was really interwoven through that. And then it's also going back to my explanation of my experience is much more technicolor than you would have in nature. And so looking for ways to represent that experience as well, tying in these other colors, because this particular situation reminded me of this, which reminded me of this, which reminded me of this. And all of those layers of memory are associated within my work. Yes?
In your transition from brighter to muted, were you inspired more by one particular season than any other?
So the transition from brighter to muter was one that I myself did not notice until after the fact and someone else told me. I had finally started making work again because I needed to start making work again. Like I said, it was driven from a lot of, I had deadlines to meet, I had shows to come up with, so I needed to start figuring out how to make work again. And so I started making work again, and it was often little bitty with one little pop of yellow or one little pop of green. And someone in my community was like, Amy, look, so much more brown. I was like, oh, they're like, yeah, do you think this is connected to the Helene? And I was like, yeah, I do. Thank you. I'm glad I know this now, actually. And so it wasn't something that I had recognized because I was so close to it. And it wasn't until someone else was like, look, I see a pattern, that it became apparent.
Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, I have, oh,
Sorry.
go
Go
ahead. Go ahead, please.
I noticed a lot of the different pieces have different techniques. How do you come up with which technique to use before you start? When you look at the reference, how do you figure it out? How do you think about it?
Yeah, so there are functionally 3 techniques across all of my work. The 3 pieces that are standing wool that I mentioned, and that is strips of felt that are stood on edge and then sewed. It looks really reminiscent of tree rings, which was my original inspiration source when I started dabbling. And then there are embroidery techniques mixed in. There are some French knots, so there's some other little embroidery things. And then everything else, 90-something% of what you're seeing here is needle felting. Needle felting is a technique where it starts as loose, fluffy wool roving, and you use a specialized tool to agitate the fibers, and it causes them to bind and compress. And depending on where you stab, or agitate if you want to sound less aggressive, it will transform into that shape. So the vast majority is needle felted, and I have some background. One of the things that I really enjoyed in college was I worked in a costume shop, and then also making tiny clothing for my stuffed animals, and all of the times that I enjoyed making clothing. That was one of my really big outlets. And in garment construction, you start 2D and you move into 3D, right? When you want to make a sleeve, it has to start flat, and you have to think about how it forms to the body. A lot of my 3-dimensional shapes, I approach them with that same perspective of a pattern maker. It starts 2-dimensional, and I think about how I can take that 2-dimensional form and fold it into a 3-dimensional piece, and that is all done through needle felting. So it is, I do think through how to create different effects, and a lot of that is where I add wool, where I compress the wool more tightly, where I layer different things on top of each other, or how I fold components that I've already felted into new shapes. And a lot of it is driven by typically the dominant imagery, right? When you look at one of these pieces, the one behind you has the pink red forms and the orange. There's kind of a dominant something or a mix of somethings. That is what drives that work. And so I will think through the majority of those techniques, because that's where it can get really complicated and how to understand how to build that. But as I was telling you all last night at our process night, adding is so much easier. Taking stuff away once you've needle felted it, it's become one. It's not coming apart, and so it's easier to add and develop these shapes layer by layer by layer.
So you said you started 2-dimensional, and then what are you using? Like whenever, the only experience I've had with needle felting was making eggs with a styrofoam ball and just going, for Easter eggs. What do you use as a base?
It's all wool.
So you're just using wool.
So the base fabric is either a sheet of pre-made felt, right, that would come machined and is that perfectly 3 millimeter thickness, or it's something called pre-felt, which is fluffier and has a lot more air between, and it is pre-felted, which it has been about halfway felted. So you can still pull it apart really easily if you tear at it, but it's already got a good bit of structure. That one has pre-felt as the background. Those two have regular felt as the background. The one behind you has pre-felt as the background. The one to your left has felt as the background. And so that's the base, but then I layer additional colors on top. I also dye a lot of my own wool, especially for the backgrounds. And so I layer the colors in flat stretches across to build out those textures, or I dye a lot of it too, and a combination of those things, but it is all through and through wool.
So you're building it on the base structure then?
It's just a flat sheet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a gigantic sheet, and then I have a big piece of foam to protect my table from my needles, and I pin it to the foam, and I felt it, and then I peel it off the foam, and I stretch it like it were a painting.
Okay.
One thing is the components, like for example the big red ones. Do you do those on the thing, or do you make those separately and then attach them?
shout out to my husband for asking a question that allows me to give critical context. The individual components are made separately and then attached. Thank you, Adam. Yes, so the individual
I know the
component, yeah, he knows my process so well. It's been for 10 years. So the individual components are felted off the surface, but then the base surface is built up on that base fabric. So like the cups behind you, built off of it and then added on.
Right.
Do you use any kind of adhesive, or do you just felt it all?
Just felting.
Okay.
Yep. If you felt it real tight, it's not going to go anywhere.
And you felt it, and then you attach it by felting it.
By felting some more.
Yeah.
I leave strategic sections unfelted because that allows me to bind it to the base fabric really securely because it wants to integrate. And so by the time that I'm done, those components are really well integrated onto their base fabric because they've been felted into it.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I embroider, and when I embroider, I like to listen to podcasts at the same time. When you're doing your work, do you like to listen to music or anything else, or is it more you like to? Because some people only want to do their craft. And
Yeah.
That's it.
There are two options. It is either silence or it is basically audiobooks. And there's very little room in between. So the silence comes in when I am mapping out a piece, when I'm trying something new and it's difficult and I need all of my focus. Or I put on my headphones and I listen to ground noise to drown out like the neighbor's dog, something like that. And so the silence I prefer when I am really thinking through, especially a larger scale piece. I tend to lay out all of my components on the big piece, pin them up, map them out. I might take pictures, put them on my iPad, draw, move them around. And then I have a pretty clear plan, which is always subject to change. And then I put on a good audiobook. I've been listening to a lot of Terry Pratchett lately with the Discworld, if anyone knows that. And then I just listen to a book and I zone in. I know people who watch shows while they felt, and I'm like, how do you not stab yourself? I do not do that. I already stabbed myself enough. Did you have a question?
So do you see yourself moving with a similar theme in the future? Have you already started to shift gears? And if you have, what are you taking from this body as a whole with you to whatever's next, even if it's something different?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because I feel like I don't always notice the shifts until later. Right, like with the comment about how I didn't even realize it was more muted till someone was like, look, Amy used brown. You're right, I used to never use brown. And so I can tell in some of the pieces, like obviously I know when I made them, but I also just looking at them by the things that I did, I could place them in the timeline order where some of these I can tell are older and some of them are newer. And I have been experimenting with actually reincorporating more purple back into it. And the two that are side by side there with the negative space, that was a recent experimentation in some of the additional forms. I have mostly gotten really into making needle felting even more complicated and doing really more intricate things, and that's been the most satisfying for me. I know that I don't typically set out with a specific, this is sort of. There have been times where, unfortunately, the vast majority of my sanding wool work was destroyed. I had quite a lot of it. And so I had been really pushing at that time to make a lot of standing wool pieces, and that was really exciting and really engaging for me. I haven't really wanted to make them because they all floated away, except for that one. That one is new. But otherwise, so that's been a space where I've kind of put that on the back burner. That's something I was actually talking to someone earlier, since that technique was my first access point into fiber arts. That feels like this stable support that exists underneath all of my work that I can always go back to, and every time I go back to it, it looks different. And I can see how I've taken what I've learned and what I've been doing, and it looks different now. And then it looks different again, and then it looks different again. And so if we were to look at documentation of all of those pieces, I can see that there are distinct phases within the way that I've done that. And I can see that within my felting work as well, because mostly it has just gotten more and more complicated. Where it used to be more simplified, I was still learning, I was still figuring out how the wool wanted to behave, and down to granularities of which sheep's wool do I like best. The answer is Corriedale. Like things like that, because they behave differently. And so now I know all these things, and I have these hundreds of hours of experience, and it's allowing me to do much more involved things. And it's allowed me to work much larger at a scale that I wasn't sure was possible, because the biggest tool that I have for needle felting is this big. So it's about the size of a quarter in diameter. That's the biggest tool that I have. And so I remember talking to a painter friend who was looking at what I was doing, and she was like, So when I want to go big, I get a bigger brush. How do you go bigger? And I was like, time. And more wool. And she was just like, dear God, I could never. And so the ways that I've expanded my technique library have given me the ability to really go big. And so the piece behind me, and it has 2 sibling pieces that are all the same size. Those were the biggest I could conceive of for a long time. And now that I've done those, wow, I could go even bigger. And so I think that's a lot of what is interesting me. I just need to find places to put them. Because big art is harder to find spots.
You talked about kind of integrating your painting process into these pieces, but a lot of them give the effect of, well, basically are relief sculptures. So do you take any inspiration or have any dialogue with any sculptors or sculptures?
So I will have to send him this recording. My favorite college professor, his name is Taylor Baldwin, and I will send him this afterwards. He gave me a book my sophomore year of the artist Lee Bonteque, and she does a lot of relief, and she uses wire and airplane canvas and a couple other things, and it is extremely dimensional when you look at it from the side and then you walk around it and it collapses and it looks like a flat drawing. That was my first really love affair with a 2-dimensional relief combination artist, and I remember I have a book, it's a retrospective of her work, and I remember getting that in college and just poring over it and looking at all of the ways where it could look 3-dimensional and 2-dimensional, it could do all of these things, and then just still be hung on a wall. And that book and that experience was so formative for the options that I thought about, because I was really interested in sculpture, but I wasn't sure that I was interested in freestanding work. And so to see that ability, I went to school at the University of Richmond. We have the BMFA there. There's Lee Bonteque there. And I would just go and stare at it and be like, wow. I was in Chicago one time with my best friend, and they were changing out the gallery at the Art Institute, and I saw through the window that they were hanging 4 Lee Bonteques, and I just stood there like this, and they're like, ma'am, you can't come in here, and I was like, okay. And so that conversation where you do have a sculpturalness, and then also you have the function of it being on a wall, something that I feel like often gets skated over is, as a working artist, I do desire to sell my work. Work that's on the wall is easier to understand. It has a context, it has a place that you can put into your mind and into your home. And so having that ability to ride the line between sculptural and painting is really, it's both really interesting to me, and it's enabled me to support my work, which is important. Any other questions? No? Okay.
This is great.
Thank you so much for your time.
Well, I hope everybody enjoys walking around, looking at the show, having a bite to eat, talking to Amy. She's going to be here until 6 o'clock. So thank you for coming, and welcome back.